Before we get into today's episode, I want to share something quickly. After building my last podcast, the Health Formula Show, to over 400 episodes, I realized something pretty crazy. Over 70% of the people listening to it weren't actually subscribed. And that matters because if you're serious about learning, staying consistent, and actually applying what you hear, subscribing makes a huge difference. So if you're serious about investing, creating long-term financial freedom for yourself, and making smarter, more informed decisions, hit the subscribe button. It really helps the show, and more importantly, it makes sure that you don't miss what's coming next. If you're listening to this because you're curious about Dubai or property here, or even just why so many people from the UK and from other countries, US, Brazil, international markets are suddenly paying attention to this part of the world, I would really encourage you to stay with me until the end. Not because I'm going to try to sell you anything, but because the biggest mistake that I see people make is not buying the wrong property. It's actually misunderstanding the system that they are stepping into. And once you really see that clearly, you just kind of can't unsee it. And when I say system, I don't just mean the buildings or the price points. I mean the framework, the tax structure, the enforcement, the incentives, and how predictable the rules are over time. Because when you invest in property, you're not just buying an asset, you're buying into the environment that the asset has to operate in. And that's very important for you to understand. And as I said, I would really encourage you to stick with this episode until the end, because towards the last part, I'm going to connect all of this to how people are actually implementing all of these strategies in real life. And that is where most people, they either get it right or they get it all wrong. I remember thinking for a very long time that Dubai was not for me. Not in a judgmental way, but more in a that's for other people way. The flashiness, the over the top, it's just not really my thing. It's not really my world. And yet here I am, living here, investing my own money here, and spending most of my time helping people, mainly from the UK, but increasingly from the US and other international markets like Brazil, think through whether it makes sense for them to do the same. And what I'm seeing isn't just the money moving, right? It's people moving their businesses, their families, their entire lives. And what's interesting to me is not Dubai itself, but it's why this is happening now, why so many people are making this decision earlier than they thought they would. When I first moved here, what really struck me was not the buildings, it was not the developments, it was actually the people. I kept bumping into British expats everywhere, like at the gym, walking my dog, sitting in cafes early in the morning, at the beach before work. And just out of curiosity, I started asking the same question. How long did you plan to stay when you first moved here? Almost every time the answer was the same. 1 year, maybe 2. And then I would ask, how long did actually been here for? Answer is usually 10 years, 12 years, 15, and sometimes even longer. And I remember thinking, that is very interesting, because once people build a life somewhere, they don't leave easily, especially when they've tried going back and realized that life back home just feels heavier, feels slower, feels harder. And I say that with affection because for a lot of people listening, the UK is their home, the US is their home, Brazil is their home, whatever it may be. And for others, particularly Americans, as I said, if you're listening to this and you're American, I know the US is your home as well. And one of the biggest things that people underestimate about Dubai and just UAE in general is safety. And I don't mean that lightly. I sleep with the door of my house open at night. You can walk at night, you can leave your phone on a table, come back after 3 hours, it's still there. You can let your kids play without that anxiety. And safety really changes how you live. It changes how relaxed you feel in your body. And when your nervous system is calmer, you make better decisions. The quality of your life is so much better. I didn't realize how much that mattered until I felt the difference. There's also this idea that Dubai is only for the ultra wealthy, that unless you are a millionaire or driving like the supercar, this place isn't really for you. And that's just not the case. One of the biggest shocks for UK investors and increasingly US and international investors when they come here is what their money actually buys them. And I want to make this very practical because this is when it usually clicks. Let's take a 1 million dirham property, all right, which is roughly 250,000 pounds. In the UK, that budget often gets you a tired flat. Far out, needs work. And on top of that, you've got council tax, you've got service charges, income tax on rent, and capital gains tax when you sell. In the US, it's not that different. You might get more space in certain states, but once you layer in federal tax, state tax, property tax, and often significant management and maintenance costs, the net return can look very different from the headline number. In Dubai, that same budget can get you a modern apartment in a master planned community, pool, gym, security, sometimes even concierge, sometimes green spaces, or even beach access. And that matters a lot when you are thinking long term. But what really changes the equation is not just what you buy, but it's how you buy it. A very typical structure here would be like a 50-50 payment plan. You might pay 10% on booking, then 40% spread monthly during construction, and then the remaining 50% after handover, sometimes over 2 or 3 years after handover. So instead of deploying all of your capital on day one, you are buying time. Time for the area to develop, time for demand to truly grow, time for value to be created way before you fully paid for the asset. And that's a completely different mindset to what most UK investors and frankly, most US investors are used to. This also changes the risk completely when it comes to rental yield, by the way, because in many Western markets, including parts of the UK and the US, rental yield comes with hidden fragility, long eviction timelines, strong tenant bias in certain states, political pressure around rent controls. Even when demand exists, enforcement risk can quietly destroy performance. In the UAE, you don't have that problem because in the UAE, rental yield operates in a far more procedural environment. Contracts are very clear, enforcement is very quick, non-payment does not drag on indefinitely, and that reduces the risk dramatically, like if you're planning to rent your apartment. So it's not just about how much rent you could earn, it's about how reliably you can earn it and keep it. And people also assume that mortgages aren't really an option unless you're fully set up here. But that's another huge misconception because in reality, most residents can usually borrow up to around 60% and residents up to around 80%, depending obviously on the bank and depending on the property. But if I'm honest, the percentage is not the point. Okay? Mortgages here are a tool. They're not the default, especially when payment plans already allow you to spread that capital without any interest. The real advantage really is optionality. It's having choices, and serious investors, they care far more about having the choices than leverage for the sake of it, for the sake of having leverage. And it probably helps at this point as well to explain where I'm coming from, because that really shapes how I see all of this, because I operate through Kamani Living and the name itself isn't the important part, but what matters is how the business thinks, you know, in terms of like the value, the timing, and the growth. One of the most talked about property deals in Dubai history was not a tower or a villa. It was a land, just sand. That land was bought for just under $10 million and sold 2 years later for $34 million. And I'm not sharing again this to impress you, but I'm sharing it because this really explains the philosophy that we operate on. It's not about selling a property, it's about really understanding systems. And this is where capital appreciation becomes very important. In much of the UK and the US, appreciation is very constrained because we're talking about mature cities, affordability ceilings, rising interest rates, and price growth becomes incremental, really. You're often relying on leverage and very long holding periods just to make appreciation meaningful. In Dubai and the UAE more broadly, it's very different because it's still in a growth phase. When you buy off plan, you're entering the market before full demand is actually realized. You are buying future supply at today's price while the city grows into it. And that is why off-plan works so differently here. When people ask why UK investors are moving to Dubai faster than ever before, and even US investors, it's not happening in isolation, right? Capital always moves towards clarity and stability and away from uncertainty. And if I'm honest, the UK property model has changed. Gross yields might look reasonable on paper, but once you factor in tax, costs, net yields often shrink dramatically. Add capital gains tax on exit, income tax on rent, inheritance tax exposure, and a very clear shift in policy against landlords, the equation looks very different to what it did 10 or 15 years ago. Dubai is very different, like the structure here is very different. There's no local capital gains tax on property, there is no local income tax on rental income. What you earn, you keep. And that changes behavior and it changes how people plan. For American and international investors, that difference is often the moment things really click. There is a very structured plan. People also have objections about livability, right? Like that it's not green enough. The air quality is not great. And what's interesting is that those objections are exactly what make long-term investment here very compelling. Because between now and 2040, Dubai is set to become over 400% greener. More trees, more parks, a doubling of green space. The coastline is expanding, beaches are growing, transport links are improving. The goal is that around half the population will live within walking distance of a metro or a tram. And then on top of that, there are 5 entirely new districts being developed similar to Expo City, real neighborhoods, homes, schools, parks, walkable communities. And when a city actively removes the very objections people have about it, demand follows. And when demand follows improvements, property values don't just rise, they reprice. Dubai didn't win me over immediately. Really didn't. It won me over when I really understood how life actually works here, when I started experiencing the benefits of it. And it didn't change me. It removed friction. And once friction is gone, you start making very different decisions. Because by the time something feels obvious, it's usually already very expensive. And this is the final point that I want to leave you with, because it's one thing to understand all of this in theory, but it's a completely different thing to implement it in the real world. Everyone's situation is very different. Time horizons, risk tolerance, capital structure, goals, and all of this matters a lot. And that's exactly why I work with people in a very personalized manner based on their specific investment strategy. So if this has resonated and you want to think through what this could look like for you, the best next step is to book a private call with me. You'll find the link in the show notes or just below this video if you're watching this on YouTube.